my name is Mary Linda Moss. I am an artist activist in Los Angeles. Um, I and several other wonderful souls have started since the election a local organizing organization, Northeast Los Angeles um, Alliance for Democracy. And we are meeting locally, but we are also coordinating and collaborating with a coalition across LA and across the West Coast. Some of you have joined us in our West Coast call. We're doing those monthly. I will be putting some of that in the chat, but that's also where I got the benefit of connecting with Frieda. Frieda is on our team, as well as having been a presenter of programs like this long before we met her. So, and I'm going to introduce Frieda in a second. I just also wanted to acknowledge we are going to have a talk from Bill also, Bill Kelly, retired environmental and energy journalist and former communications manager for the South Coast Air Quality Management District. He started covering environmental policy in the nation's capital and has written for the LA Times, Scientific American, LA Weekly, and many other publications. He's also author of Smogtown, The Lung-Burning History of Air Pollution in Los Angeles, The People's Republic of Chemicals, Home Safe Home, and other books. He also co-published a web-based news service on the regulation of energy utilities in California and the West for more than 15 years. So we're going to have a short discussion from him, presentation from him after Frieda's talk. And then Frieda, as most of you know, is an Iranian American socialist feminist activist, translator, and writer. She's a public librarian in Los Angeles. And once again, we have the benefit of her ability to translate and illuminate what is happening and how we can make a difference in a way that has a depth and breadth, but also very accessible. So I appreciate hearing everything that she has to say. And we'll go ahead and have you start, Frieda. Thanks.
Thank you, Mary Linda. I really appreciate your co-hosting and your introduction. Hello, everyone. Great to see you, those who have come back, and if you're new, great to see you. I'm going to start with the state of the environment in 2025, and then talk a bit about eco-socialist alternatives, and then what technologies do we have to save the planet, and what is holding us back. So catastrophe is an appropriate word to explain the state of the world's environmental crisis. The level of global warming caused by carbon dioxide produced by industrial use of fossil fuels and methane produced by industrial agriculture have increased the post-industrial global temperature rise beyond 1.5 degrees Celsius. In 2024, which was the hottest year since global temperatures were recorded 175 years ago, the median global temperature rise was more than 1.5 degrees Celsius. Until recently, that figure, 1.5 degrees Celsius, was considered a limit not to be crossed, and now we've crossed. The fires, droughts, floods caused by climate change are known facts. Glaciers are melting and oceans are getting warmer. The overuse of plastics has led to plastic pollution on land and in the oceans, as well as the human body. Air and water pollution are seriously damaging human health and causing deaths on a large scale. The Conference of the Parties, or COP, annual meetings of the countries that are parties to the United Nations Framework on Climate Change, keeps issuing goals and promises which they do not abide by. According to Science magazine, the Earth is now beyond 6 of its 9 planetary boundaries and is well outside the safe operating space for humanity. Now, in the US, as we all know, the second Trump administration has undone years of climate policy in its first 3 months in power. It has canceled federal grants related to environmental improvement and renewable energy. It has fired the Environmental Protection Agency and many other federal workers. It has reversed long-standing environmental regulations. It has increased the consumption of oil and gas. It has also destroyed the US Agency for International Development, whose environmentally related grants were making a real difference and improving life in the global South. In Los Angeles, where I live, we have experienced the results of climate change in a terrifying and devastating way with the latest wildfires, which burned down hundreds of homes and whole areas in the neighborhoods of Altadena and Pacific Palisades. As the late Mike Davis has stated in his 1998 book, Ecology of Fear, Los Angeles and the Imagination of Disaster, Los Angeles is a profoundly inegalitarian society that is apocalyptically out of balance with its environment. Black communities like Altadena have been disproportionately affected. And now with the push to rebuild in the fire-prone zones, the elimination of most building and environmental rules for rebuilding, and the Trump administration's threats to withdraw FEMA funds, Los Angeles is bracing for even more disasters. Big technology's massive investments in artificial intelligence are also leading to the building of large data centers that require enormous amounts of energy and cooling water at the expense of human needs. So these are some of the facts about the reality that we're living through in 2025. In this class series on humanist alternatives, my goal has been to explore alternatives to capitalism that put both humanity and nature at the center. Capitalism as a mode of production based on alienated mechanical labor cannot be an alternative because its goal is production and accumulation of monetary value as an end in itself. And it leads to war. It promotes human selfishness and discourages critical thinking. It promotes destruction. While some thinkers believe that humanism and capitalism can be compatible, I argue otherwise. Humanism as the idea of humans coming together around universal emancipatory concepts and using their potential for reasoning and critical thinking to solve problems can only be fully realized through the transcendence of capitalism. Humanism, I argue, is also the antidote to fascism. It's the antidote to fascism's rejection of reason and fascism's embrace of naked capitalism. So in today's class, we will examine the ideas of several thinkers who bring together ecology and a humanist opposition to capitalism. And then we will talk about the technologies that are available to save the planet and what is holding us back. Okay, 3 eco-socialist thinkers. So I would like to take up the ideas of Michael Lowy, Kohei Saito, and Maria Mies. Michael Lowy is the research director at the National Center for Scientific Research in Paris. and the author of Ecosocialism, a radical alternative to capitalist catastrophe, a book that was published in 2015. Lowy argues that, on the one hand, some socialists have simply advocated taking over capitalist technology, increasing production, and the idea of human domination of nature as a solution. On the other hand, various ecologists, especially deep ecologists, have abandoned humanism in favor of equating all living beings. In his view, both are problematic. Lowy's ecological socialism is about a democratically planned economy in which use value is the only criterion for production. And the goal is to create more leisure time for all. He challenges both the totalitarian states that have called themselves socialists and also the social democratic and welfare states for not transforming the oppressive production relations of capitalism and for ignoring ecology. For Lowy, ecosocialism begins with a working class-led revolutionary transformation of the capitalist relations of production. It requires a revolution in the energy system itself. Such a revolution would promote social equality, democratic planning, a complete break with harmful sources of energy, including nuclear energy, and a focus on solar and other safe alternative energy systems. He also proposes replacing industrial agriculture with farmer-run organic agriculture. Can everyone still hear me? Good. Now, another eco-socialist that I'd like to introduce is Kohei Saito, and some of you might already know of Kohei Saito's work because it's been discussed in the New York Times and other mainstream newspapers. Kohei Saito's Degrowth Manifesto was published in 2024, originally written in Japanese, but the English version was published in 2024. It's partially inspired by the French thinker André Gortz, who coined the term degrowth in 1972. Degrowth is a planned reduction of energy and resources use designed to bring the economy back into balance with the living world in a way that reduces inequality and improves well-being. Saito believes that the problem of capitalism is both rooted in the private ownership of the means of production and market mechanisms that capitalism has, and also the imperial, what he calls the imperial mode of living of the rich world of the global north at the expense of the periphery or the global south. He believes that recycling resources is insufficient to save the environment and to save humanity. Instead, he says we need both a just distribution of resources and an absolute reduction in resource consumption, hence the term degrowth. Saito's degrowth model is what he calls the restatement of communal principles of steady state economics. That's what he calls it, steady state economics. Such a model has the following features. It's an economy based on use value as opposed to exchange value. It's based on the reduction of working hours, the abolition of the mental manual division of labor. It prioritizes essential labor, that is labor-intensive work, such as caregiving and teaching, which cannot be routinized and automated. And his alternative is about both a return to agricultural life and new forms of urban life to promote democratic state and municipalism. He's also advocating mutual aid and self-governance. Okay, now on to the third thinker that I'd like to take up. Maria Mies is an ecofeminist and offers similar views, similar to Saito, but from a feminist perspective. In her book, Patriarchy and Accumulation on a World Scale, she rejects both the mental manual and the male-female division of labor. Instead, she advocates an embrace of a more rural existence with a much closer relationship to organic matter and nature, and a much larger share of the workforce in agriculture. She calls for an alternate economy based on autarky or self-sufficiency. She calls this a movement away from employment in industries towards employment in agriculture. And she advocates decentralization, autonomy over our bodies and lives, and responsibility by both women and men for domestic labor and childcare. Okay. Now, this, what she calls the feminist concept of labor, Mies argues, will mean the following. First, the necessary labor of creating our material needs and reproduction will be viewed as both burden and pleasure and will not be alienated. That's what she claims. Secondly, we will have a different concept of time in which she says time is not segregated into portions of burdensome labor and portions of supposed pleasure and leisure, but in which times of work and times of rest and enjoyment are alternating and interspersed. The length of the working day is no longer very relevant. That's a quote from her. And thirdly, she says work will be a direct interaction with nature, organic matter, and living organisms, and that itself will reduce violence against women. So these are some of her views. So Lowy, Saito, and Mies have all made important efforts in offering ideas for a possible alternative to capitalism that would be concerned about humanity and nature. All of them recognize that capitalism, with its drive for production and accumulation as an end in itself, will only lead to the destruction of humanity and nature. All of them recognize that in order to overcome capitalist exploitation and oppression, it is not enough to establish the collective ownership of the means of production and take over control of capitalist technology and production relations. They believe that those production relations have to be revolutionized and transformed for the benefit of humanity and nature. All of them advocate democratic decision-making in workers' councils. Saito and Mies call for ending the mental manual division of labor. Mies emphasizes the return to mostly agricultural labor and a rural existence. Lowy, Saito, and Mies all claim that their alternative economy is based on producing use value and not exchange value. So these are some of the views that they share. Now, in class 1 in this series on labor and economy, we learned that for capitalist production relations to be transcended and for humanity to move in the direction of ending the mental manual division of labor, producers have to have collective ownership and control not only over the means of production, but also over the time that they need to produce goods and services based on individual, local, and environmental needs and limitations. So it's not enough to own the means of production. It's not enough to even say you have control over it. You have to have control over the time that you need to produce based on individual, local, and environmental needs and limitations. And I explained that as Karl Marx had argued in his work, Capital, the capitalist rule of an average time or socially necessary labor time determined behind the backs of the producers would have to end. Because under capitalism, we don't control the time that we need to produce things based on our individual local environmental conditions. It's some kind of average time, average global time, that's determined behind the backs of the producers. So if you're not able to produce goods or services within that average time, then your labor is valued less. So labor would have to, so we have to have control over the time that we need to produce goods and services based on individual, local, and environmental conditions and limitations. And labor in a post-capitalist society would have to be a thoughtful and meaningful act. Many tasks would have to be shared. People would still need to have areas of specialization. However, for labor to be a conscious and aware process, everyone needs to have an understanding of the whole and to keep developing their knowledge and awareness of the whole instead of being a cog in a machine. And that's another very clear distinction of capitalism. That under capitalism, we're all in a way cogs in a machine. We don't necessarily have an understanding of the whole of what even the work that we're doing. We're just doing part of it. Only a thin sector of workers or people who are employed under capitalism really have an understanding of the whole. So for us to be able to transcend capitalism, we need all these transformations that are, of course, not easy. We also learned that for an economy to produce only use values and not exchange or monetary value, which is represented by money, labor itself needs to be thoughtful and meaningful and not be a mechanical act reducible to a social average. Because when labor is a mechanical act and it can be reduced to a social average, then it can be measured by something like money. Marx has a discussion about this both in Capital and also his earlier draft of Capital, which is called Grundrisse. And this is a very, very important point, the connection between alienated labor, mechanical labor, and an economy that's based on money. So Lowy, Saito, and M.L.I.S do not delve into these necessary details. In the case of Mises' ecofeminism and his advocacy of a return to a mostly agricultural existence, where she says that's what will end the mental manual division of labor, I would argue that it's very important to be clear about what ending the mental manual division of labor means and to draw some lessons from history. Most importantly, in China, under Mao Zedong, during the so-called Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution in the 1950s, 1960s, and early to mid-1970s, the slogan of ending the mental manual division of labor was used by Mao and other leaders to push peasants and exiled intellectuals to perform slave labor in the countryside. So clearly, that is contrary to the very principles of humanism. And it's very important, that's why I'm saying it's very important to be clear about what ending the mental manual division of labor means, because even that concept has been so abused that it's not enough just to say it. And going back to an agricultural existence does not necessarily get us there. So it's important to think through and critically engage with the ideas proposed by eco-socialists while holding on to the perspective that ending alienated labor is an absolute necessity for humans to break with capitalism and to save humanity and nature. We cannot do that. We cannot save humanity and nature. We cannot break with capitalism unless we break with alienated labor. So now let's delve into the question of whether we have the technologies that can save the planet and what barriers we face on that front. Next slide, please. Thank you. So there are currently effective technologies that can be used to save the planet. However, capitalism's insatiable desire for the production and accumulation of monetary value is sabotaging these steps. As we see in the US and around the world, the fascist Trump administration is reversing the gains made under the Biden administration concerning renewable energy, both here in the US and in the global South, with the cuts in the US Agency for International Development. We currently have solar and wind energy technologies that are highly developed and can increasingly take the place of fossil fuels within a relatively short period of time. However, at a time when this goal has become entirely possible, capitalism's profitable investments in artificial intelligence, which is a questionable and dangerous technology, are pushing the added sources of energy in the direction of building and sustaining the AI data centers at the expense of human needs around the world. So now that we have the technologies to use the solar and wind energy technologies to provide enough energy for the planet and to really break with fossil fuel use, now that energy is going in the direction of keeping those data centers going for a very questionable technology. We humans also have the capacity to produce enough food to feed the whole world. But our capitalist system lets food and produce rot instead of being sent to places where it is needed. Often it's not profitable from a capitalist standpoint to transport the food. And capitalism also sabotages sustainable organic agriculture in favor of polluting industrial agriculture. A landmark assessment commissioned by 147 countries and made public last December has examined the interconnections among biodiversity, climate change, food, water, and health. And according to Paula Harrison, who is a co-author of that report and an environmental scientist, we have been separating the issue of parasitic diseases that affect 200 million people each year in Africa from the issue of fertilizer runoffs. According to Pamela McElwee, who's another author of that report, a major problem in the current approach to ecology is that the biodiversity literature is quite separate from the water literature, which is quite separate from the health literature, which is quite separate from the food literature, and climate change, and so forth. So we can see that a holistic approach to these problems does exist, but for it to be realized, we need to go beyond the capitalist framework. When it comes to fires and floods, which are increasing due to climate change, the most immediate means of reducing the destruction to humanity and to nature is to not build in fire-prone and flood-prone zones. And yet we're continuing to build in fire-prone and flood-prone zones because capitalism does not allow us to do otherwise. Because it's profitable for capitalism, even though it's destructive and it leads to even greater fires and greater floods. We have the basic technologies for building homes and offices with more insulation and ventilation, but obviously that is not happening on a global scale at the level that we need it. We have the basic solutions such as building more public transportation, facilitating more conservation and recycling. These are all possible, but they're all being hampered because of the capitalist system. And then the technologies such as carbon capture and injecting sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere to block sunlight and cool the earth, they are actually very dangerous technologies and can have unpredictable and unintended consequences, but millions and billions of dollars are now going into these technologies, even though they're extremely dangerous. Thank you, Mary Linda, for changing the slide. So where do we go from here? We have the technologies, we have the knowledge, we have the collective wisdom of eco-socialists, scientists, and everyday people who have long been cultivating alternatives rooted in justice and care. So it's not that we lack solutions. What we lack is the determination and moral courage to go beyond a capitalist system that is killing both the planet and our capacity for meaningful, non-alienated life. What if we trusted ourselves and each other enough to challenge the logic that says production and accumulation of monetary value is more important than survival? What if we stopped waiting for permission from the very capitalist system that profits from inaction? So, in conclusion, the question is not whether humanist ecological alternatives are possible. The question is, are we willing to fight for these alternatives and gain the mass support that is needed to realize them? Thank you so much. And would you please show the references one more time on the last page? And I will make these slides available along with the recording of the presentations on my website. They'll be available in a few days.
So Bill Kelly is another member of our core team of the Northeast Los Angeles Alliance for Democracy, has been a part from the beginning, and also is a retired environmental and energy journalist and former communications manager for South Coast Air Quality Management District. He started covering environmental policy in the nation's capital and has written for the LA Times, Scientific American, LA Weekly, and many other publications, also author of Smogtown, The Lung-Burning History of Air Pollution in Los Angeles, and The People's Republic of Chemicals, Home Safe Home, and other books. So, Bill, I am going to go ahead and share in a minute, but I'm going to go ahead and let you introduce yourself, and then you let me know when you're ready for me to start sharing the presentation.
Great. Well, thank you, Mary Linda, and thank you, Frieda, for a great presentation and making yourself a hard act to follow here. As Frieda said, global warming has been known as a condition we're facing for a long time. There have actually been more than 30 years of efforts within the capitalist system, a variety of schemes from regulations to emissions credit trading, all sorts of things, grants from taxpayer money to try to solve the problem. But the levels of greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, for instance, continue to go up. They've gone up 35% since 1960. They go up every year. So, what's the problem here? The problem is that capitalism depends upon economic growth, and that means digging more materials out of the earth, pumping more materials out of the earth, and putting them through an economic production system. If you're old as I am, that if you have less than 1% growth in GDP, you've got a recession. And God forbid if you go into negative GDP growth, you're in a depression. So therefore, it's incumbent upon people that are leading the capitalist society we live in to stoke growth and to use more resources. And this puts more pollutants into the air, waste into the land, oceans, poisons, and so forth. Now, I wanted to just take the recent fires here in Los Angeles as a example of how to operationalize the critique that Frieda has laid out in terms of a specific set of incidents and in terms of potential solutions and the barriers to those solutions under the economic system we live in. So as you know, yes, if we could go there, that would be great. But stay on this page because I want to talk a little before we look at the following slides. But we have a situation here where we already have trends of warming, and we have trends of increasing fires here in California, throughout the world, really, and almost all the Mediterranean and Siberia. What is happening? Basically, as Frieda mentioned, the climate has become warmer. California, as a specific example, more heat waves. You're having bigger swings in precipitation rather than even precipitation or narrowly variable precipitation. We go through drought and deluge cycles. And with the fires that occurred in January here in two areas, Palisades and Altadena, the World Weather Attribution Project, which is a project of the College of London, Imperial College of London, Royal Netherlands Meteorological Institute, and the Red Cross Red Crescent Climate Center, found that the conditions brought by climate change, global warming, made the fires that occurred here 35% more likely to occur. Now, if you look at what was going on at that time, for those of you that are out of the area particularly, the rains failed. We reached January and it hadn't rained since April the preceding year. And on top of that, the weather was abnormally warm for that time of year. So we had a windstorm, we had a source of ignition, and we had huge fires that were ignited close to where people lived. There were 20,000 homes and structures burned down between the two fires. I want to talk about Altadena a little because that's close to me. And it's also an area that's known for having a historical Black area, society, and culture. And basically, Altadena has two sides. One side is well-to-do, one side is working class, largely Black. And the homes are normal homes, 1,500, 2,000 square feet, and they are close together. And the fire that was ignited with 90 mile an hour, 100 mile an hour winds burned through there very rapidly, destroying about 10,000 homes and businesses. Fire had occurred before, but we didn't have the winds when it occurred before. The area burned in 1993. But this time it was an utter disaster. And now the area is looking at rebuilding and what sort of requirements to incorporate in rebuilding, and also looking at whether it should rebuild. Areas and canyons, the hills throughout the West, really, are prone to fire, have long been prone to fire. And with climate change now increasing the area that fire will cover in California, for instance, by the middle of this century, it's expected that the annual area that fires will burn will increase by about 77%, which is a big area. And the state has put out new maps showing the fire risk area has grown dramatically, even here in my community along a waterway. So let's take a look at the slides here. And this is an example from the National Association of Counties as to what would be needed to make a neighborhood or a community fire resilient. And if you look at it, there are fire breaks where there are trails, streets are wider. You have standards for the structures to be made of fireproof material, metal roofs, cement walls, that sort of thing. You have requirements to cover decks so that embers can't get under them, and maybe sprinkler systems and so forth. And then if I can get the next slide, Mary Linda, thank you. This is how a home might look in the areas that would have to be built differently. And you can see here that you can't go under the deck because you don't want debris down there. So it's sealed. So debris that can become flammable is not there when embers come and so forth. And, the eaves of the house are sealed so that embers can't get up into the interstices of wood joints and burn or enter vents and that sort of thing that are typically in those areas. And then if we could get to the next slide. So all of these things are possible and can be done. Here's the problem. The problem is that it costs more money. Home building in Southern California, where I live, is about $400 to $500 per square feet. So if you have a house that's about 1,500 square feet, it's going to cost you somewhere between $600,000 and $750,000 roughly to build. And doing this is going to raise the cost by more than $50,000 in today's dollars. So a lot of people, particularly when you get into rebuilding in an area like Altadena, they simply get priced out of the market. They can't do it. So unless there is government intervention here, both in terms of standards, and right now they're allowing them to build to fire code standards that were set by the state in 2020. There are 2024 standards that incorporate the lessons from fires in Paradise that you may have heard about, which burned down 20,000 structures. And they're letting them build to standards that were implemented, were in place before the lessons learned from the Paradise fire. And they're suspending environmental review standards for rebuilding. So the idea is to eliminate the regulatory barriers, allow it to be rebuilt as cheaply as possible. But because of the fact that a lot of people won't be able to rebuild, it's likely that without government help and financing for this and standards, that a lot of the people that live there, particularly in West Altadena, in the Black community, will simply move on. And the area will become an area like East Altadena, full of big fancy homes inhabited by well-to-do people, or it will become multi-unit because that's the way that developers can make the most money out of it. So this illustrates the dilemma that we face with the economic system that we have and these climate disasters, which are coming fast and furious now in every way, including hurricanes, which we don't read about most of them all around the world. So with that, I'll leave it, but we really need to change the economy, to control global warming and to adapt to the effects of global warming. Otherwise, you're going to have more and more people that are displaced, essentially climate refugees, right here in the United States and all around the world. So thank you. I'll leave it there, and hopefully we can have a good discussion.